Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to a very special edition of Let's Talk Buffs. Because in this episode, we're not just going to talk Buffs, we are going to discuss the entire landscape of the college football playoff, some of the bowl games that some of these teams are in. I'm Mario Vitanzi. With me, as always, is the Zach Seegers. As we were talking before, one of the self-proclaimed greatest arguers of all time. And we're going to put that to the test. But before we get to that, Zach, before we get to the meat, right, the juicy part of this sandwich, give me a quick breakdown of the CU season, kind of final thoughts as we put a bow on a season that started great and ended really poorly. It was very much akin to Game of Thrones, right? The very beginning of that, it was a fantastic show. Everybody was invested. Everybody was here for it. And the last season, or the last few games of the CU season, very much like Game of Thrones, completely fell flat. Very few people, if anybody, liked it, and just super disappointing. But that doesn't take away from CU as a whole or from the show as a whole. It simply did not end the way that a lot of people would have liked. So give me your breakdown, Zach.
Yeah, I'm concerned for the first time ever. You know, the moment Prime was hired, I was a big advocate for it. I was like, people don't know what he's bringing to this program. The transfer portal thing is great. He's got great coaches to support him. All these things. I'm feeling worried for the first time ever. I don't love the vision with Pat Shermer. I think they're putting too many eggs in the transfer portal basket. From what I've been hearing, it seems like they're really not prioritizing high school recruiting, which I think there's something to be said for that strategy in this new world. But you have to be so elite on the transfer portal, especially because there's not many good trench players. That's why that was everyone highlighted that problem going into the season for CU last year, because they knew they didn't get any guys really that were all that great in the transfer portal because those guys aren't really there. And I don't know. You lose Sean Lewis, and not that he was the greatest thing ever, but I felt like there was a clear vision, a clear direction at that point in time. The whole demoted situation, like if he just walked away, I think it would have been fine. But there's just a weird situation there. Now you're trusting Pat Shermer to like really lure some top college transfer recruits to CU. I mean, maybe, but I don't know. The vision seems a little lost right now to me for the first time ever. I feel like Dion might be in Colorado for a while with the way things are going right now, just because, and maybe that's better for everyone in the long run, but I am not feeling very confident about the 2024 Buffaloes. 3 weeks into the season. Yeah.
Let me ask you this then about that, Zach. Is your confidence waning simply because of Pat Shermer, or put a percentage on it? Like, what percentage of your lack of confidence is a direct result of Pat Shermer?
20-30%. Like, it's a healthy chunk, but so much of it more is like, whoa, they're not making really any inroads on recruiting. And I know last year it like all happened in 24 hours, and I hope that happens again. And I am singing a different tune, but right now I'm concerned. They're also losing, like they lost Nick Williams to Syracuse today, probably the top recruiter on the staff, outside of maybe Charles Kelly. On top of like, not only do they have to like upgrade the offensive line, they have to replenish it because they lost two big contributors to the offensive line. They lost one of our dogs of the week, Michael Harrison, to the transfer portal. They currently have like a ton of players looking to get out of the program. Michael Harrison, Ian Carey, Anthony Hankerson, who arguably the best running back on the team this season. Marvin Ham, arguably the best linebacker on the team this season. Again, the two offensive linemen, Christian Lichtenhan and Van Wells. And then Caleb Faria is, I mean, he couldn't get on the field. That one's okay. Same thing, honestly, there with Ian Carey. But it's just, I don't know. It doesn't feel like with a rebuild, you want it to almost feel like the Sean Payton thing. Like, okay, maybe there's some bumps early, but now it's all looking up. Like things are heading in the right direction. Even if they lose or whatever, it's heading in the right direction. Dion, it seemed like it was heading in the right direction early, and now we're hitting the bumps in the road, and there's some real potholes, and that's what has me concerned.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I would have liked to see the inverse of that. Obviously, it was fantastic when they started so quickly, the national attention. I mean, one of the big reasons that we started this podcast, Zach, is because they were the biggest story in all of college football. And I know that sounds kind of crazy to think about right now, but that's really where we started at the very beginning of the season, starting with that TCU game. For the first month of the season, there was absolutely not a bigger story in college football than CU. And yeah, they've fallen a long way, and I'm with you. They're really going to have to hit the transfer portal hard. Hopefully they're still able to get some of these kids from the 2025 class interested. I know it seemed like they had a bunch of commits and then a bunch of those kids decommitted. And we could talk about this at a later date because I don't want to get too bogged down into it. I have a real problem with kids committing in their juniors in high school, right? And I know we had talked about it a little bit, and again, don't want to get too much on it. And it's not that I blame the kids, but it's like, don't allow them to commit until they're at least, I don't know, midway through their senior year, midway through their senior season. It just seems so silly to ask a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old where they want to spend college playing football, because so many things can change, not even year to year in college football, the month to month, in terms of coaching staffs and personnel and kids entering the transfer portal. And I just feel like there should be a rule that if you verbally commit, you have to be held to that for at least a year. That way you're putting an importance on the value of actually committing. So anyway, I'll move on from that. Hopefully they're able to kind of reclaim some of those kids in the class. But you're right, the transfer portal, they're going to have to hit it hard, and they're going to have to do a better job than last year, plain and simple. We were really excited about a lot of the prospects and a lot of the talent that they brought in, and we saw the end result on the field. The bottom line is they were just not near where they needed to be in order to compete with, the Oregons of the world, like not even remotely close. And especially in a year where the Pac-12 was so stacked. And isn't it karmic justice that the Pac-12 would have arguably its best year as a conference in its last season? It was almost like a giant middle finger, a giant FU to the Pac-12 committee and that entire conference. And what would be the cherry on top, Zach, is if UW were able to win it in the last year of the Pac-12 as just another gigantic middle finger to everybody that runs this conference, because it has been an absolute clown show. I mean, for me, it started back when Christian McCaffrey 100% should have won the Heisman. But the Heisman voters came out and said they straight up did not really watch any of his games. And why would they? If they're all on the East Coast and Christian McCaffrey doesn't start playing until 8 p.m. California time, why the hell would they stay up for him?
It's their jobs. That's why.
Yeah, I get it. And I'm not going to let them off the hook. But the Pac-12 after dark games, like if we could see fewer CU games starting at 8 p.m. our time, 8:30 our time, as you've amply pointed out on this show and on Twitter and in real life, Zach, I'm old. I'm too old to be staying up that late for college football. It's my bedtime at halftime. I can't have that, man. Like, we need to have some changes. But anyway, we could go on and on about how terribly run the Pac-12 was. That could be a whole show in itself. But the transition here that I want to get into is we're talking about UW, who is one of the two teams that I think undoubtedly deserve to be in the college football playoff. The other one obviously being Michigan, 1 and 2, rightfully so, the undefeateds that won their conferences. Now, obviously, there was a fourth undefeated who also won their conference, Zach, that did not get in. And it has really stirred up a lot of feelings and emotions across the landscape of college football. So I'm going to tee you up here. You give me your take, and then I'll kind of counter with mine. First question is, did the selection committee get it right? And second of all, do you favor what they did in terms of the eye test and maybe who was the better team as opposed to who was the most deserving? Because obviously Florida State was deserving. I don't think anybody is going to argue that, because it's impossible to argue that. But here we are, and here we sit, and Florida State is not in the college football playoff. So, Zach, did they get it right? Would you do anything different? And if so, what?
No. I mean, I think you could maybe argue for. I mean, I don't even know. I actually don't. Those would have been my four. I think it's the right choice. I don't get what the big deal is, if I'm being honest. Like, I just the idea that oh, how dare they? This team had so many wins and it didn't go to them. That's how it's always worked. Literally, all of college football, all of a lot of college sports. I won't say all because I do think there are exceptions to the rule, but anyone that uses a polling system, this is how it works. You do a poll where people don't just. It's not that these teams aren't ranked by their record. That's not what the 1 through 25 is. It's a group of people, whether it be coaches, media, or the college football playoff committee, and this group ranks these teams subjectively. So many of the arguments made in favor of Florida State, well, they're in a Power Five conference. They had a tough out of conference schedule, yada, yada, yada. These are points that have been brought up in the past to bolster someone's case in this subjective argument. You don't need points like that. We don't have to have a debate if it wasn't always subjective. It's always been this way. That's one. Two, the job of the committee is to determine the four best teams. It's not the four most deserving. To what Mario said, if we're talking about deserving or precedent or any of that, I agree. Florida State has a great case to be in it. But the game is, or I guess the task is, who do you think the four best teams are in college football right now? And I have not heard, outside of like Mike Norvell's comment, but like from fans on Twitter and everything, or analysts, even people in favor that think FSU should be in, I have seldom heard, frankly, I don't think I've heard a single one, but I'll say I've seldom heard an argument for FSU as one of the four best teams. It's all about being deserving. It's all about, hey, you don't play the games on paper, blah, 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 blah. And all true. FSU would have a chance to win the national championship, as does Ohio State. But Ohio State's not one of the four best teams, so they're not in the playoff. And Florida State's not one of the four best teams, so they're not in the playoff.
Yeah, we kind of knew going into this weekend that whatever happened, that it was going to be a logjam. It was going to be a little bit of a mess. And honestly, Zach, I get the feeling that the selection committee wanted Florida State to lose and probably expected them to lose. I expected them to lose. I know that they have an elite defense. Their defense is fantastic. But they beat up on a Louisville team that was very up and down all year. It's like they were good for the most part, but they threw out some stinkers. So I'm not entirely shocked that the Florida State defense, who has a number of guys that will be playing on Sundays on that roster, I'm not surprised at all that they shut Louisville down. But you're absolutely right. The eye test has to come into it. And if you're a Florida State fan, I apologize. And if this was CU, I would be upset. I would be upset because that's my team. That's who I root for. But if we are being completely realistic about it and we're using logic and we're using the frontal cortex of our brains, that tells us that Florida State did not deserve to be in it. They are trying to avoid a situation, Zach, like what we saw in the national championship game last year. Why? Because everybody turned the game off in the second half, aside from Georgia fans, right? Georgia fans love seeing the ass woman they put on them, but nobody else in the country wanted to see that. And maybe it's a far cry to say that something like that would happen, but they're trying to avoid it. And the other case that I'm hearing, Zach, is like, oh, well, they would get their backup quarterback back in time for the college football playoff. He's not Jordan Travis. If Jordan Travis does not get hurt, a Heisman hopeful, probably wouldn't have been a finalist, but his name was certainly in the discussion. Florida State's in, and Alabama or Texas is out. And then what happens, Zach? In that situation, it opens up a whole other can of worms, because I honestly feel like had that happened, if in an alternate universe where Jordan Travis doesn't get hurt and Alabama still wins the SEC championship, we see either Texas or Alabama left out. And really, it's a toss-up between the two of them. Aside from the fact that obviously Texas beat Alabama, but again, it gets down into the eye test. So now you're saying,
I would have left.
And here's where I'm going to argue with you, and we can go back and forth. You're saying that the four teams that are in it are the four best teams in college football. And I get it. Wins at the end of the season matter more than wins at the beginning of the season, okay? But there is not an argument that you could make to me that would tell me that Georgia is not one of the 4 best teams in the country. And I have no allegiance to Georgia. I have no foot to stand on. And here's kind of my counter to what they're saying in terms of keeping Florida State out because of the injury to Jordan Travis. They all but said that was the reason. Why don't we discuss how, despite having an unhealthy Brock Bowers, who's easily the best offensive weapon that Georgia has, I mean, if you watched him and you used the eye test, Zach, he was far from 100%. That dude was out there on one leg. He was 65, 70%. And if it wasn't the SEC championship game, Brock Bowers is not playing. So if we're going to make the argument that a team should be left out because a guy is hurt and is not going to play for them, how can we also not make the same argument that, by the time the college football playoff rolls around, Brock Bowers will be 100%. That Georgia offense looks entirely different. And honestly, they're probably winning their 3rd national championship if Brock Bowers is not hampered by, the injury / coming off of the surgery that he had. So for my money, Georgia is easily a top 4 team. And honestly, Zach, I can make a case to you of why Ohio State should be. Now, I'm not saying that they deserve to be in the college football playoff, but if you're going to talk about one of the 4 best teams in the country, I'm hard-pressed to say that Texas is better than Ohio State. Ohio State's only loss on the entire season was to Michigan at Michigan in the Big Ten championship. That, of all the losses that we have seen the 1-loss teams had, that was by far the best because Michigan is now the number 1 team in the country. They were 2 and they played. So as long as we're handing out flowers to anybody and everybody that should be in the conversation, you could make a real case that Ohio State is one of the 4 best teams. But obviously you can't have a 1-loss non-conference champion in it. And the reason that I bring this up, is because there is a dangerous line. And this is the only problem that I have with Florida State not being in. It sets, to me, a dangerous precedent where you are completely at the mercy of the selection committee. And this is why it's good that it's going to 12 teams. We're never going to have this issue again, because if someone's going to argue about who's the 12th team, who's the 13th team, who's the 14th team, at that point, who gives a shit, okay? Yeah. If you're not one of the 12 teams, you do not deserve to be in any sort of discussion. Honestly, if you're not a top 8 team, I think 12 is a little bit too many. I think they could have capped it at 6 or at 8. I thought 8 would be the perfect number, but 12 means more revenue. Where do you draw the line between the eye test and how good a team is based on what you've seen, their win-loss record, and what they deserve? That's my question to you, because if I was setting my perfect Final Four playoff, it's Michigan, it's Washington, it's Georgia, and
yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with Georgia. I would still put Bama over Ohio State. I'd say Bama has the better win. Yes, maybe Ohio State's loss is better, but Bama has a win over Georgia, and that really trumps anything Ohio State has on their resume also. And it's not even, for me, a deserving point, but you competed at a higher level. We got to see you play at a higher level against a higher level opponent, that being the conference championship, and you performed very well in that. That's a test we didn't get to see Ohio State in. So yeah, I think I don't know. I think you lay out a good case for Ohio State. Honestly, for me, it's like just not Florida State. Like, I agree, Georgia's deserving. I think Oregon's a better team than Florida State right now. Like, 100%. So for me, that's what it came down to. And I'm glad you brought up the slippery slope argument, because I've heard that one a lot too. Like, oh, the precedent this sets, It doesn't set a precedent, because we're changing the system entirely next season. And until someone does what Ohio State did, if people remember, like, one of the very first years, if not the first year of the playoff, Ohio State won the whole thing as the 4 seed. And it's like, oh, hey, having 4 teams is super legitimate. We just saw a proven case of that. Until we see like a 10 seed or a 9 seed or something win it. And I do think the playoffs should be big. It's more fun. It's the way it should be. Absolutely. But until we see like a 9 seed or a 10 seed win it, I'm not going to be shedding tears over like, oh, we're the 14th team. What the fuck? This is crazy.
Exactly.
So yeah, I don't think this is going to be a problem anymore. And also, in the future, they have a normal like playoff format. In the NFL, if you win your division, you get in. If you have one of the three best records by a non-division winner in your conference, you get in. Very like objective qualifiers for making it. That's what we get finally in college football next year. Very clearly defined objective things. Win your conference. If you're in a Power Five, you're in. Get a high rank. I guess like the weird one is for group of five. Get a high ranking as a group of five. Hey, go undefeated. Lose one game and you'll probably like be like Liberty and you can get into the playoff that way. I don't know. To me, it's a non-issue. And again, these people's jobs, they've done a bad job in the past, but let's focusing on the here and now. These people's jobs were to determine the four best college football teams. I am down to hear arguments for other ones than the ones they picked, including Florida State. I have not really heard a compelling argument for why Florida State's one of the four best teams, except for the fact that Alabama nearly lost to a really questionable Auburn team. And Florida State, I think, stomped that same Auburn team. That's the most compelling argument I've heard. But I don't know.
Here's the thing, man. Florida State right now is ranked 5. Georgia's ranked 6. They are going to play in some sort of bowl. I don't have it in front of me, but I know that they're playing. Right now, Zach, the line is Georgia by 14. And this is a Georgia team that did not get into the college football playoff. And here's the thing. Florida State has an opportunity to, again, with the middle finger reference, they have an opportunity to give the whole college football world a massive middle finger by going out and beating Georgia. Now, I guess my question is, since it's not the college football playoff, how motivated is Georgia to send all their dogs out? Like, will we see a Brock Bowers? He's going to be a top 10 pick, potentially better, like potentially even in the top 5, depending on how he grades out and everything. First rounder, regardless. They have a lot of NFL ready talent on that team. And so are we going to see a full Georgia team? That's the only question I think coming up with this bowl game, because, we see it every year. We already saw Caleb Williams, even though it's not as prominent as a bowl game. We are going to see guys that opt not to play in the bowl game so that they can get ready for the NFL draft. But let's just assume that they're going to be at full strength. Florida State has a chance to prove us all wrong, right? And that is the only thing that can happen from here on out, Zach, that I think would convince me and maybe convince you, like, shit, yeah, we messed up. We definitely should have had Florida State in there. But if the Florida State team that we saw this weekend is the Florida State team that we see against Georgia, they're going to get beat 42-0. Yep. And it's going to be a boat race. It's going to be like the national championship game last year. A bunch of people are going to be tuning out. And honestly, if I'm Georgia, I'm taking out my frustrations out on this team. I want to mollywop them. I want to wipe the floor with them. I want that game to be over by halftime. Now, I don't think that's going to happen because Florida State still has a very good defense, as we've said. And again, it'll be interesting if they play all of their studs as well. But barring some sort of incredible upset where both teams are at full strength and Florida State beats a Georgia team, there's absolutely nothing anyone can say or do and nothing that can happen that should convince anybody that Florida State should be in it. And you know what the big problem is, Zach? In my opinion, and the reason so many people have an issue with it, it's that Alabama mystique. Fans of college football are convinced that Alabama gets special treatment. But you know what? There's a reason. They are a really good team. And these same fans also think that the SEC gets special treatment. This was a down year for the SEC. Yes, it was not loaded top to bottom, minus Vanderbilt, the way that it is every single year. Yes. But the fact of the matter is that it is still the SEC. And until further notice, the SEC will absolutely rule college football. And if anybody listening for a second thinks that they were going to leave out a one-loss SEC champion, be it Alabama, be it Georgia, had it been LSU, had it been Ole Miss, it doesn't matter. They are not leaving out a one-loss SEC champion, period. It's not going to happen. And you know what? From here on out, we're never going to see it because it is 12 teams now. And Again, I think 12 teams is a little much, Zach. I think they could have accomplished everything they wanted with 8. I think 10 would be maybe the sweet spot, and that's even stretching it a little bit. And then you just give the top 2 seeds a bye week and let the rest of the 8 fight it out until then. But I just don't see it, man. I don't see it. The SEC is always going to reign supreme until there is a seismic shift in college football. And hell, maybe it'll happen, Zach. Maybe with all of this conference realignment and the divisions all looking different next year, maybe we will see another conference dethrone the mighty SEC. But until that happens, the SEC is going to be well represented, deserve it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is deserved. I think the same people making this case for Florida State wouldn't be making it if Liberty went undefeated. Why? Because Florida State is in a Power 5 conference. Well, guess what? Just in the same way the 10 conferences as they currently exist aren't created equally. We've got a group of 5 and a Power 5. The conferences within that group of 5 are not the same. The American is clearly the best. And the conferences in the Power 5 are not created the same. I mean, it's the SEC is the best, right? We all know that. The Big Ten is the second best. The Big 12 is the third best. And then it was the Pac-12 and the ACC. Ooh, which one's the worst? That's what it was. And then when Clemson was great, it was Clemson is great, and we can all see that Clemson's great, but man, everyone in their conference is terrible. But hey, we've given the label of Power 5, so we have to treat Florida State just like we would an undefeated Ohio State team or an undefeated SEC team. No, it makes no sense. I don't know. Like, it's all the same people that would say, like, would argue against the subjective favoring of the SEC, in my opinion, are arguing for subjective favoring of the ACC over other conferences. They just don't like getting the short end of the stick when they have to deal with conferences bigger than themselves. It's like, hey, I would like it where the 5 of us are all on a level playing field, and then we've got the 5 below us. Well, guess what? That's not the reality we inhabit. So I don't know. It's not a non-starter to me. As for like motivation for this game, I agree. Georgia doesn't have a ton to play for, but Florida State has a ton. All the shit I've talked about Florida State in this episode, if they win this game against Georgia, claim a national championship, do the UC 100%.
Yeah.
I would support it. You win 100%. Undefeated. You weren't given a fair shot. You beat the reigning 2-time champion. Treat it like a WWE belt. You took out the big dog. It's yours now. Like, I just absolutely do a full UCF. If they pull off this upset, they absolutely, and I know it won't be recognized widely. I'm not arguing for it to be recognized widely. Most people accept the CFP result, as they should. But if you're Florida State and you win this game, absolutely claim one. Get a banner made like UCF did. Go all out with it. I think you should be annoying about it.
Yeah, absolutely. But the fact of the matter, it's not going to happen unless Georgia sits all of their studs, because Georgia is just on another level. Again, like, Georgia had a really good loss. And I know it's so weird talking about how good and how bad losses are, but this is just kind of the era that we're in, and these kind of things matter. Georgia, for my money, still might be the best college football team in the entire country when completely healthy. And again, I don't like Georgia. I have no reliance on them. I have no affiliation with them. It's just what I've seen all this year. They have been consistently the best team. Now, they haven't been beating the brakes off of people, and they haven't been as dominant as they were the last 2 seasons. But this was a weird year for college football, Zach. And I kind of noticed this the first month of the season. Georgia was winning, which you expect, but they weren't really winning the way that you would anticipate a 2-time national champion winning, because they weren't doing it the same way. That's where the eye test comes in. UW has looked good all year. Oregon looked great all year. Bama looked, aside from the Texas game, looked really good all year. Texas looked really good aside from the Oklahoma game. But all that being said, and all these teams, Ohio State looked really good until the very end. There was not, that those 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 definitive teams where you were like, yeah, this is the best team in college football. And honestly, the last 2 years, based on what you saw out of Georgia, they were far and away the best team in college football. and they won the national championship. And obviously last year they did it very handily. I get that they almost lost to Ohio State. And if Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't get hurt, maybe we're having a different discussion. But that's just how it is. And that gets back to the eye test and what you are seeing. And if you are watching college football, which you hope that the selection committee is, then you have to trust that they're going to make the best decision. And yeah, I'm completely with you. If Florida State finds a way to win this game, by all means, be obnoxious. You have earned it. But you know what I would do, Zach? I would go in a different direction. I would have all my guys show up. I would have them go through warm-ups on the field. I would have all this pageantry and everything. And as soon as the ball is kicked off, as soon as that game starts, I'm having all my guys that are on the field walk to the sideline. And then I'm having all those guys walk into the locker room. I'm going to have every one of them light up a cigar. And once again, big middle finger to college football. That's what I would do, because you're not going to get anything from playing in this game. I mean, unless that you actually think that you have a realistic chance to win it. I'm just walking right off the field. Go back into the locker room, light up a stogie, say that we're better than this. We deserve better. We needed to be in the college football playoff. This game is beneath us, so we're not going to play. Now, that is never going to happen in a million years, but shit, that would be hilarious.
Honestly, it would. It'd be like a Hunger Games in it. I don't know. I'd be I'm always for the chaos scenario. I wanted the chaos scenario this weekend, and we got it. And yeah, I don't know. I don't think FSU should be in the playoff. I totally get all their upset and outrage and any way they want to protest or throw a little tantrum about this. I honestly will probably support. I just I get their end of it. I also think the committee made the right call. Their job is to pick the 4 best teams. FSU is
100%
4 best teams right now. I don't think they're one of the 4, 6, 7 best teams right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's totally fine. You're a really, really, really good college football team. You are not elite as it stands right now, not without Jordan Travis. Plain and simple. That's how it is. Let's segue and just get right into our picks, Zach. I know I'm springing this on you, but give me your prediction for, first of all, the Michigan-Alabama game, and then give me your prediction for the Texas-UW game. Who are we seeing in the national championship?
I kind of think Bama does it again. But since that Auburn game, I mean, beating Georgia, I think Georgia's better.
Be a good way to piss everybody off even more.
I just think it's going to be because they're extra motivated to win this one. You know, Nick Saban's going to be using if you lose this, they're going to be saying you didn't even belong, blah, 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 blah. So I think Bama does it. And then I think Washington beats Texas. And then I think that'll be a great national championship. Let's go with Washington. I struggle to imagine a Pac-12 team beating an SEC team in the Natty, if I'm being truly, truly honest. But let me go with Washington winning it all. I could see it happening. They've played a lot of really tough teams. Like Oregon has a lot of that physicality, in my opinion, and they've done it twice. They've got a crazy offense. Bama's a little down this year, even though they are in the playoff. I'll go with Washington. That's how do you see it shaking out?
You know what? I'm actually going to go in the opposite direction. It feels weird, but Michigan seems like they're not getting the respect that they deserve. I mean, they're pretty clearly the best team in the country because they beat, again, in my opinion, a top 4 team in Ohio State. And I think if the situation is different and that game is played on a neutral site, or obviously if it's played at Ohio State, I think it's a little bit different. But at the end of the day, Michigan won that game. I would wager to say that Michigan is probably the most well-rounded team in all of college football. They have a quarterback who is going to go, if not in the first round, he'll go relatively early in the NFL draft. They have a very good running back. They have a great stable of receivers. They're good up front, both on the offense and defensive side of the ball. Secondary strong. Linebackers are super aggressive, super athletic. There's really not a glaring weakness in this team. And honestly, I feel the same way about UW. There is a reason that those are the top 2 teams in the country. And where we stand right now with the teams that we have, as I see it, those teams are marketably better than Texas and Alabama. That's just my opinion. Now, I think Texas has gotten hot at the right time. I think Quinn Ewers is really starting to come into his own as a signal caller, and it's going to be really interesting to see how his year next year looks. because he can play himself into being, a top 3 pick, if not the first overall pick in the draft, if he continues on the trajectory that he's on. But I don't know what it is. I just have a hard time believing in Texas, and I have a hard time believing in Bama. I think that you got their absolute best game when they beat Georgia, but they have holes. They have flaws. Milroe has gotten much better as the year's gone on, but something that we have to look at, Zach, I mean, we talk about how important the quarterback position is in the NFL. Same goes for college football. And the 2 best quarterbacks in the college football playoff right now, they're on the 1 and 2 seeds. And so I think that it's going to end up being Michigan versus UW. And as much as I would love to see UW, and I would absolutely love to see a Pac-12 team win it for the aforementioned reasons that we talked about, just sticking it to the Pac-12 conference and saying, yeah, it's a real shame that you couldn't make this work because here's your national champion. Oh, and by the way, you had the main event, or not the main event, but the sideshow of Deion Sanders and everything going on at CU. You had an incredible team at Oregon. You had an Arizona team that was ranked. You had a Utah team that was really good. You had a USC team with Caleb Williams. I mean, it goes on and on. This was far and away the best year for the Pac-12, and it was karmic justice that this was the last season, and now the Pac-12 is basically folding. And so as much as I would like to pick Washington, bottom line is I trust McCarthy more than Penix. I like Penix as a passer. I like him a lot as a college football quarterback. I feel like he gets bailed out by his wide receivers, especially Adunze, more often than not. And Michigan is the kind of team that can take advantage of the missteps that Michael Penix has become prone to the last month or so of the season. So again, I would love to see UW, but I think it's going to be Michigan and UW, and I think Michigan ends up winning it. And then we're going to have to get into discussion, Zach, about, well, should Harbaugh have been coaching? Does he deserve this national championship? Did they suspend him for enough games? And my only response to that, and again, I don't really have a dog in this fight, but we as Bronco fans, Zach, we know that the team pursued Harbaugh incredibly aggressively. And he told the team, according to reports, he told the Broncos, no, not once, but twice. And I guess my question is, if Harbaugh knew that something was amok in his program, don't you think that he would have bolted to the NFL the way Pete Carroll did to USC? I mean, Pete Carroll left everyone high and dry at USC, and no one really seemed to care that Pete Carroll got off scot-free. Don't you think that Harbaugh probably would have done the same thing if he didn't know everything that was going on?
He still can. I mean, I don't know. Like, I wouldn't count him out yet. If they win a national championship here, it's a pretty good time for him to just ride off into the sunset, take the Chicago Bears job or whatever.
All right, well, that's how we got. Why don't we do this, Zach? Give me the Heisman finalists were announced. Who is your Heisman winner?
I mean, I think I'd go with Penix. I think you can make a strong argument for Washington as the number 1 team. It'd be between them and Michigan for me. I mean, I guess that's kind of obvious. But definitely a top 2 team, and he's been out of his mind. That's who it would be for me. Second, probably Jaden Daniels. I think he's been amazing this year, but his team being lesser, I think, is ultimately the dividing factor there. Michael Penix has some really top-notch wins. He has the stats. He has the eye test. Bo Nix, I think, is a little fraudulent, if I'm being honest. That is like a little pop gun offense.
Agreed.
He's been good, but he'd be my 4th of the 4. And Marvin Harrison would be 3.
I would love to see Marvin Harrison Jr. win it just because it's become a quarterback award. Like every once in a while, a running back will win it. I think once upon a time, one DB win it was Woodson way back in the day. I would just love to see a receiver win it, man. And if there's ever been a wide receiver that I feel like deserves it, it's Marvin Harrison Jr. And granted, that's a really good team, but you look at his production last year with CJ Stroud, and we're seeing what CJ Stroud is doing at the professional level. Enter McCord, who is a very good but not great college football quarterback. Like he did a good enough job to get them undefeated to the end of the season. Couldn't quite get over the hump of Michigan. But the fact that Marvin Harrison Jr. was able to produce, if I'm not mistaken, even more than he was with the likes of CJ Stroud. I mean, Marvin Harrison was that offense. That offense went as Marvin Harrison Jr. went. Unfortunately, I just don't think that it's a wide receiver reward, despite the fact that he scored 14 touchdowns. I just don't think that they're going to take him seriously as a candidate, even though in my mind he deserves it the most because of the position that he plays. I think you're right. I wanted to say Jaden Daniels going into this because plain and simple, his stats are better. I think he ended up maybe is the Davey O'Brien Award winner for the best quarterback, but you got to figure that they are going to factor records into this. And because Penix is on arguably the best team in all of college football, and he put up those numbers, and he beat a lot of really good teams throughout the Pac-12, I think it's almost his by default. But this is another very interesting year. Like, not only was there not a top dog team throughout this college football season, there's really not a top dog Heisman candidate either. I mean, it could go to any one of these four guys, and I don't think that it would surprise me. I don't think there's one candidate on here. And I do agree Bo Nix is a little bit fraudulent because of the system they run. But at the end of the day, that was a very good team. They had 2 losses, and it was both to Washington. So I think that you have to give the nod to Penix over him. But he put up the numbers. And I mean, is that not what the Heisman Trophy is about? It's the best player in college football, which is why I would personally vote for Marvin Harrison and why I would want him to win. But I don't think that you can give the award to a Jaden Daniels whose team just didn't win enough. Maybe through no fault of his own, but they just didn't get the job done for him. So if Jaden Daniels doesn't win the Heisman Trophy, it's really the fault of LSU. But I'm with you. Like, at the beginning of my rant, I was going to make a case for Jaden Daniels. And the more I thought about it, Penix is one of the best quarterbacks in the country on an undefeated team and the number 2 seed. I think almost by default, it has to go to Penix, even though I would prefer Marvin Harrison to get it.
Yeah, and his stats are gaudy too. I agree on the fact that Marvin Harrison Jr. is the person I most want to see win it. I'll always root for the non-quarterback, whether it be a wide receiver, a defensive player. Like I hope Christian McCaffrey wins MVP this year. I don't think it'll happen, but
apparently the leading favorite is Brock Purdy now, Zach. Which if that doesn't tell you that the NFL MVP is a quarterback award, nothing will. Because I would love to see what Brock Purdy would look like without Christian McCaffrey.
Bo Nix nominated for the Heisman and Brock Purdy nominated for the MVP. That's the world we're living in.
It's a very strange, very interesting, very terrifying world. Any closing remarks before we get out of here, Seegers?
Yeah. Man, farewell to the Pac-12. All that's been very sad to see. I think it's a great conference. Look up some of the look backs on the great moments of the Pac-12. There were some great moments. I think my all-time favorite will be Marshawn Lynch hijacking I know it was the Pac-10 back then, but same conference, hijacking the golf cart and driving it around. That was sweet.
So you're looking back fondly upon the Pac-12. The music in the background is playing. It's like, I will remember you.
Yeah. Yes. It's a very emotional goodbye. It's like the final goodbyes at the end of The Bachelor.
See, this is how I know that you're a fetus, because to me, CU will always be a Big 12 team. And maybe it's because when I went to school there, granted they transitioned to the Pac-12 while I was there, but they're a Big 12 team to me. And it just never felt like the right fit. I mean, when they made the move, I disagreed with it. I didn't think that it made a lot of sense. Part of the issue I had with it is they had this long-standing rivalry with Nebraska, which was so great for so many years, even though they pretty much own that rivalry for the large part. But they took this rivalry away. They tried to kind of force the CU Utah rivalry upon us just because they were kind of late entrants into the Pac-12 and they didn't really have rivals themselves. It just never felt right. I don't know. I was never a fan. I like the Pac-12. You're right. It's a good conference, and there were plenty of good memories. There was a lot of talent that came through there, namely on a lot of those Oregon teams. But man, it was just weird to me. It was weird when they joined, and it was so refreshing when they made the announcement that they were going back to the Big 12. So I guess my last question for you, based on the rivalry, who is going to be CU's new rival in the Big 12? If you had to guess.
I'm hoping for Arizona. I think we've seen the Utahs maybe a little out of their class, though I would make a lot of sense if it just carries over to Utah. But Arizona will need one, and I feel like Colorado and Arizona could be a good back and forth.
I guess if we had to pick one. All right, well, that's all we got for you today. Thank you for watching Let's Talk Buffs. My name is Mario Vitanzi. That's Zach Seegers. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Vitanzi Therapy, at Zach_Seegers. Once again, if you know the person at Zach Seegers, or if you could just tweet at them or slide into their DMs and force them, maybe even bully them to relinquish that name to the actual real life Zach Seegers, who works his ass off, who is a credentialed member of the media, by the way, because he deserves it more than whoever the hell this other Zach Seegers is. Unless, what if, did you make that account maybe when you were younger? See, now that I'm thinking about it, Zach, I get the sense that maybe when Twitter first came out and you were like 6 or 7 or whatever you were, you're just barely learning how to walk in your, you got your little little books with the feeling on them, and you push buttons and they make noise and stuff like that. Just little Zach Seegers walking around, and you opened a Twitter account because you thought it was fun and because, the 9-year-old up the street was telling you that it was the cool thing to do. And you made it at Zach Seegers, and you probably used some weird email that you don't use anymore because it's super embarrassing, like hot, nice hair guy, 69, something like that. Or you use some weird password that you forgot, something that has to do with boobs or butts or something like that. I feel like that's actually your account, and you made it when you were a little kid and you forgot all the information. So you're like, well, this is super embarrassing. I'm just going to have to take the underscore now, and no one will know that the original Zach Seegers is actually me.
I think you might be fairly close to the truth. I know I think my original might be like Zach.Seegers or something. I did have an original account though. I was thinking you were dead on, but I just looked it up to see what the deal is. The at Zach Seegers, no underscore anything, is a suspended account. So I don't think that was me. They've been doing something. They've been doing something to get themselves banned from Twitter. I have no idea what the other Zach Seegers was doing, but
what kind of moron gets suspended from Twitter?
I know. They must have threatened someone. They must have.
How stupid do you have to be to get suspended from?
Oh, the poor Mile High Mario having to use his professional work accounts, though.
Pour one out for Mile High Mario on Twitter. Thank you for everything that you did for us. Gone way too soon, but not forgotten. All right, everybody. That's all we got for you. Mario Vitanzi, Zach Seegers. We love you all so much. And as always, Sko Buffs.